Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us. It's 2 o'clock, and thanks for joining us for the COPEC Daily Financial Wellness Program. For those of you that might be new, of course, we're broadcasting every day at 2 o'clock. We have a different topic in conversational mode and usually a different guest speaker. And today, of course, we have Mike Schoedinger joining us again. He's going to talk about grief, myths, and misconceptions. And we'll be broadcasting course till 2:30. Then generally, if we haven't answered all the questions that have come in, we're going to kind of keep the lines open and stay with it here up till 3 o'clock to make sure we've addressed all the questions. We've had Mike Schoedinger coming back with us, president of Mike Schoedinger Funeral Homes. And Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you, but I've got one question to lead off. What are all those numerals behind your name there? What does that stand for? The ABC.
Oh, I'm a certified funeral service practitioner and a certified pre-planning consultant. And both of those accreditations and about 50 cents will get you a cup of coffee. So, yeah.
Well, it still distinguishes you. So.
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, it was something we did when we first started, and it was a donation to the foundation. And so, anyway, glad to have them.
That's good. Well,
yeah.
Turning to the topic at hand, grief, myths, and misconceptions. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here so that I can get my PowerPoint up there. And welcome everyone that's listening. I just want to spend a few moments sharing some of the wisdom and knowledge I've gained over the years about how to help people who are grieving. And I'll say right up front, grief doesn't have to be from a death. We all have loss in our lives. It can be relationships, from a divorce to a breakup. I experienced a loss recently in that my kids went off to college. That is a loss that I grieve. It can be financial. People are obviously suffering today financially with job loss and job, pay cuts. All of those can cause us to grieve. And I want to share with people some healthy and unhealthy behaviors to support those people that are dealing with that. I'll start just by a little background about our company. We were founded in 1855 by my great-great-great-grandpa. We are Columbus's oldest family business. Now we are run by the 6th generation of descendants. I love this picture of my first and second generation, the founder and his 2 sons in front of the Undertaker Company down on South High Street downtown. Today we serve over 10,000 families, both humans and pets, and pre-planning throughout Central Ohio. So that's a little background about me. I think when we need to talk about grief, the most important thing that we need to remember is that everyone grieves differently, and there's no right or wrong way to grieve. So some people you'd think would be sad, and they don't appear to be sad, and others are excessively sad. So it is something we all do differently. A couple definitions, because a lot of people don't know the difference between these words. Grief is our emotional response to a loss, like death. So I feel sad because my mom died is my grief. Loss is obviously the absence of something that I wanted or owned. I think my minister at my church, Jerry and I go to the same church, and he's famous for saying when something is taken away from us before we're ready for it to be taken away is when we experience loss and grief. Mourning, with a U in it, is what we do with our outward expression. So when I cry because I'm sad, that is my mourning. That is my outward expression. It can be me acting out in anger because I'm so mad at a person who maybe committed suicide or something like that, died in a car accident. And bereavement is my inner feelings, my reaction as a survivor, what's going on inside of me. So a little bit about the definitions there. Obviously, when we learn about loss, and I'm going to use death as the primary loss since I'm in the funeral business, Normal responses are sadness, crying, denial, helplessness. We can get restless, lethargic. All those kinds of things can happen. People lose their appetite, stop sleeping. Those can all be responses to a loss. As members of the Western society, people that live in America, there is a onward and increasing movement about denial, which is not probably healthy. A lot of papers have been written about the taboo of talking about death. You just don't bring it up. You don't talk about it. There's the medicalization of death. Should we be helping people die, physician-assisted suicide, things like that? There is the segregation of dying. We put people in nursing homes now instead of caring for them in our home. We put them in hospitals, so we separate ourselves from the people that are dying. We are definitely seeing a decline of rituals. More and more families are choosing not to have the dead body present for a funeral, and or having a service or something to honor the life in general. Those are all changing, I think, for the worse. And I'll talk about that a little later. And, just a lot of people are saying, when I die, just throw me in the river, cremate me, put me in a pine box, whatever those kind of death denying statements are. And it's depriving their survivors of a chance to grieve because they're not having the ceremonies that we've been used to for hundreds of years. So there are a lot of misconceptions around grief. Mourners need to be strong and carry on. How many fathers have said to their son, boys don't cry, men don't cry, don't show that you are sad. Tears are a sign of weakness. You need to just get over what's going on, move on. Time heals all wounds. The best thing to do for that person while they're sad is just leave them alone. I believe every one of these statements is not necessarily accurate, and we'll talk about these more here in a second.
You might want to defer this, but that was a good question that came up. Is maybe everybody's different on how long they grieve, but is there a period of time when they should get through the grieving process, or is that very individual?
Yeah, and if somebody is asking a question, because I'm sharing my screen, I'm not seeing any of those. So feel free to interrupt me at any time if there's a question in the chat or whatever.
Sure thing.
I don't pretend to know that there is a set time for everyone. I know that a lot of people get over their grief when the funeral's over and they move on. And I know people that years and years and years later are still sad, and neither one is right and neither one of them is wrong. I think as long as you're dealing with it and coping with it in a healthy manner, instead of medicating it with alcohol or pills or bad behavior, I think the number one way to heal from loss is to face it, to encounter it, to embrace it, instead of shoving it under the carpet and thinking it'll go away. It will come back someday, somehow. And I'm going to talk about a grief model that talks about the concept of encountering our grief here in a few slides. And it is the only way to heal. I mean, you can have argument after argument with your wife and think that everything's fine, but it will come back and rear its head. And you have to talk about it. You have to encounter that conflict for it to get better. Same with grief. You just can't not deal with it, because there will be another death down the road that may trigger the same feelings you had when this death occurred. So I don't know if there's a right or wrong time frame, as long as you are dealing with it in a healthy manner would be my recommendation. And I'll talk at the end about how you can do that. So healthy steps, when you first hear about a death, you have to acknowledge the reality of that loss. A good example of when people didn't do this was 9/11, our anniversary. We just had the 19th anniversary a couple days ago. And, all these people were told their loved one was in a tower that collapsed, but they never got proven that their loved one died. And a lot of them today are still dealing with, they've never acknowledged that their loved one died because their brain never got that proof. They never saw their loved one. So one of the things we have to do is acknowledge that the loss has occurred. We have to experience the loss. We have to express our feelings. We have to talk about it with our coworkers, talk about it with our family. You have to, when I'm going to use the word encounter, that feeling. And then reinvesting in other relationships. It's the people who lose their spouse and then eventually, re-engage with a new partner, maybe get remarried, and cancer patients and things like that. It's a healthy thing. I love it when a person dies, maybe of call it a drug overdose, and the mom is so grief-stricken that her son has done this, or her daughter, that she invests her energies in helping other people not have overdoses. That's a good, healthy example of dealing with loss. Getting support, whether it's just informal with your families and friends, whether it's formal, actually going and seeing a professional psychologist, psychiatrist, meeting with a mentor, someone who can help you through this, who might have some expertise, your pastor, getting that spiritual support, and just listening and other pastoral help, taking classes. There's so many things you can do to better educate yourself about loss or death. A lot of employers offer an employee assistance program. We do at Schoedinger, where any of our employees can go and get 8 sessions for free that Schoedinger pays for, because we know that our staff is dealing with intense levels of emotions, whether it's our customers, you have 4 overdose deaths in a row in a week, and you have angry parents coming in. That's a lot for our funeral directors to take on. So we want them to be able to get professional help. And it's anonymous. I don't know when they go. I don't know who's getting help and who's not, so they can do it in a safe and confidential way. So those are some ways to get some support. I think the funeral home.
To interrupt real quick,
Yes.
what would be examples of the classes that are available or that people can attend, or who sponsors those?
Well, the COPEC class, how to deal with grief, like today, or I'm gonna actually, I have a slide coming up that will talk about resources that exist.
Okay.
The hospices have a lot of them, and other medical systems, and it's coming up in a slide here. I'll show you.
Okay.
Yes. Tom Lynch is a funeral director in Michigan who I love his quote. He says, "A good funeral gets the dead where they need to go, but it gets the living where they need to be." So I just think that's such a great quote. Many people remember Elisabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief. She invented this in the 60s. It's still used a lot in clinical situations. I'm going to show you a more contemporary model here. But just to remind you, Elisabeth said, when we first hear of a death, we deny it. Then we get mad. Then we might bargain with God. Oh my gosh, my son was in a car accident. He's on life support. If you just save his life, I promise I'll go to church every Sunday. Those kinds of things. And then eventually depression, and then hopefully acceptance. That was her 5 stages of grief. I'm going to submit that in life today, we are a tea kettle, and every one of us has these fires brewing up underneath us, and they're just heating up our tea kettle. And if we have a cork on our tea kettle, like this picture, that's not good, because eventually it's going to blow up. It's going to have an unhealthy release. These are the people that shoot people and do just evil things in the world. I think they have unresolved grief. We act out, we are violent, we have heart attacks, we die of, disease. It's clinically proven that stress and not dealing with loss can cause all these bad things. So my hope is to help people have a healthy release. Take that cork off that tea kettle, let that steam out. Crying is an example of expressing your grief, and that's called mourning. This guy who invented this is Alan Wolfelt. He's out in Colorado. He's still living. He's a great guy. And I love his quote that talks about how people think it's easier to just not deal with death. We're not going to have a funeral. They end up trying to go around their grief instead of through it. And that results in what he calls living in the shadow of the ghosts of grief. That whole concept of trying to go around my conflict with my wife, going around the conflict with my children, my boss, and ignoring it instead of going through it and dealing with it is a great metaphor. So his model says we have these losses on the left, which I'll call death, and our normal response is to evade them. We just ignore them. We deny it. We don't like pain. We don't like to do things that don't make us feel good. So we avoid them. And that leads to that corked tea kettle. And what he said is you have to encounter the loss. You have to acknowledge the reality. You have to deal with it. And he says we do this through funeral rites and rituals. We sit down at the funeral home. We have a planning meeting where we talk about the life that's been lived. As hard as it is, we talk about the life. We ask questions to get you to think about the relationship you had with your loved one. How did your mom and dad meet? Tell me a story about one of your favorite memories with your grandpa. What are you going to miss most about your wife? These are really hard questions that get to us dealing with things in our heart and not up here in our brain. We don't heal in our head, we heal in our heart with our feelings. And our goal isn't to get to normal. Our goal is to learn how to reconcile our new life with this loss. I'm now divorced. I'm never going to be married to that woman again. How do I reconcile with that? My children have left my house. They now are on their own. They've gone to college. They'll come home and get their own place to live. I am no longer taking care of my children. How do I reconcile with that loss? And grief shared, when we share our feelings is how we diminish them. That was an old famous rabbi, Earl Grolman, who said that. Our needs for mourning, we have to acknowledge the reality. We have to move towards that pain. We can't go around our pain. We have to move towards it. We need to remember the person who died. We need to continue to carry on the legacy and share those memories. When we've lost somebody, let's just pretend I've lost my wife. I have a new identity. I'm no longer Mr. and Mrs. Michael Schoedinger. The mail that comes to my house that says Mr. and Mrs. Schoedinger needs to be changed because there is no longer a Mrs. Schoedinger. I have a new identity. I go to my church couple circle. I'm not a couple anymore. I have a new identity. It's an awkward transition. We all go through it. And we have a search for meaning. What am I going to do now without my wife? She was my everything. We did everything together. We have that search. And then the best reason why we gather for visitations and calling hours and funerals is to receive support. We let people come up and give us a hug. We let people tell us a funny story that might make us laugh. It might make us cry. Laughing and crying are examples of mourning. We're expressing our feelings. And this COVID has really hindered this. It's driving me crazy because only about half the people that normally come are even coming to a funeral because they're worried about the contagiousness of it. And the elderly is primarily who we work with. But when you do see them, you can't give them a hug. You got to stand 6 feet away. You have this desire to embrace them physically and you can't do it. It's been really hard for me professionally to not be able to touch the people that I work with because I've always been a hugger.
And Mike, in that context, so many people are deferring their celebrations of their losses just because of the COVID.
They are.
Do you think that's going to have a long-term negative impact, or?
Unfortunately, I do.
Yeah.
I think it'll take a long time to get back to what I'll call normal, when normal was 8 months ago. So yes, I just think the elderly are more cautious. I actually had an appointment to pre-plan a funeral with somebody this week. And when I called her to confirm, we were talking and I shared with her that I had just flown on a plane to a meeting last week for the first time since COVID. And I was talking to her about how great I thought it was, and the plane was clean and everything, the airports were clean. And she said, with all due respect, Mr. Schoedinger, I'm going to wait 2 weeks because now that you've been traveling, you're a higher risk.
Oh, wow.
And I said, I respect that. I will wait. You have every right to say, wait, let me wait 2 weeks to make sure I'm not asymptomatically contagious. Mm-hmm. And I was I'm mad at myself that I didn't think of that she had to say something like, can we wait until October to meet? And we will. We'll take care of it in October, and hopefully I'm not sick. But she's being safe, and that's delaying our ability to do business together. So back to how do we help? We assist families and the communities understanding the importance of grief. We literally argue with sometimes people who just say, we don't want anything. And we give them examples of just all the thousands of people we deal with a year who say we didn't want something and we talked them into it. And then when it's all over, they're like, thank you. We're glad we did what we did. We needed this. I see it every single day. So it's almost an argument to get people to honor the life that's been lived, to talk about the death, to help them learn how to form these memories of their new relationship now that the person is not physically here anymore. Their new relationship is one based on memories. And we always are giving families choices. Here are your options, and let them pick what they think is best. By acknowledging the loss and the feelings associated, we can show that we are aware that the person is hurting, and we can allow that healing to happen. To say something like, this must be very hard for you, doesn't say, I know how you feel. It doesn't say a lot of things. It just acknowledges that you probably are having a tough time. I'm not saying, I know you're sad. I know you're mad. I'm just saying this must be very difficult. I want you to know I care about you and I'm here for you. Those are the ways that we help people, support them, and help them heal. Ask them to tell you a story. That's not an evasion where we're not going to talk about it. I literally could say to somebody, tell me one of your favorite memories of your time with your dad. And they may cry through telling that story, and that's okay. So I'm helping them focus their memories on the life that was lived rather than what's probably consuming their thoughts, which is the death that just occurred. Let's focus on the life and not the death. I talked a little bit ago about touch, holding someone's hand, hug, putting your arm around their shoulder like that picture shows. I love the word care. I just want you to know I care. I think that's such a safe word to say to people. I care about you. So I love this little statue, this guy talking to a statue. Just some more validations of helping people, let them cry. And then I have highlighted there something that's very important. We can't be judgmental. And this goes back to Jerry's earlier question, how long is enough? Well, if we're making that determination, then we're judging. Oh my gosh, your loved one died 3 years ago. You should be over this by now. That's a judgment. And I don't go there because we need to be free of judgment. Or, I haven't seen you cry once. You just lost a really important person in your life, and I haven't seen you be sad yet. Well, you know what? She suffered for months with her disease, and it's a blessing that she's gone. And we're thankful for her life, and we're thankful for her death. And don't be judgmental about how people are responding. Just remember, sometimes the only thing you need to do is be there. You don't need magical words. Just your presence is oftentimes enough. And then this glares at me because I'm a man, and men are known to be fixers. When our wife comes to us with a problem, we want to give her the solution. We want to fix it. And sometimes women don't want a solution. Sometimes they just want to be heard. And then lastly, they say it's very healthy to say the person's name. So instead of saying your husband or your wife or him, say Roger, Sharon, use their name. Supposedly that helps psychologically with their healing. Here's some things to not say. This is my favorite slide because when we see this, we go, oh boy, I've said all these things. But when you say to somebody, I know how you feel, maybe you don't. Just because you lost your dad and I lost my dad doesn't mean we feel the same way. You're young, you can find someone else. It's probably for the best. Be thankful you can have another baby. Everything happens for a reason. Time heals everything. All these aren't very helpful. And then this is the one that catches most people. Hey, if you need anything, call me. Well, here's why that's not helpful. You're putting the burden on them. They already have a big burden. They don't need more of a burden. Your job is to take the burden off of them. So don't put the burden on them. Say something like, it was great seeing you today. I want you to know I'm going to be praying for you. I'm going to be thinking about you. Would it be okay if I called you in a couple weeks and checked in? Ball's in my court. I'm the one who's obligated to continue to support you. You have no job, no responsibility other than just to receive my love, receive my care. That's way healthier than if you need something, call me. Because guess what? My grass hasn't been mowed in 2 weeks. My lawn's a foot high, and I'm never going to pick up the phone and say, hey, Jerry, you offered to help. Would you bring your lawnmower over and come and cut my grass? Thank you, Jerry. You're never going to do it. You know what? I just don't feel like making dinner tonight, and I've had pizza the last 3 nights in a row. Jerry, would you mind bringing me over a meatloaf? That would be great. We're never going to do it.
Right.
So don't put the burden on them. Some people like to say the Lord never gives us more than we can handle. It's in the Bible. No, it's not. There are verses in Colossians that kind of deal with this, but they don't say that. And to tell somebody that doesn't make them feel any better because they're feeling pretty crappy. And they may not even be liking their Lord right now. And so that doesn't often make them feel better. Just providing them reassurance that what they're feeling is valid and that the person who died meant something. Saying something like, I'm sorry, I will miss Bob very much. This must be very hard for you. I remember a time when John helped us out. He really made a difference. Let me tell you about what he did. That's a great example of using the person's name and talking about how their life added value to yours. I can't imagine how you must feel. I just want you to know I care. That's a powerful, supportive statement. It's okay to cry. Don't give advice. They need to come to their own conclusions. Don't say things like, you're doing so well, you're so strong. Mourners need permission to be sad and to do things poorly for a while. Don't try and hurry them through their grief. Don't make that offer about calling. Don't say don't cry. It's important. Don't be judgmental. These are kind of repetitions. Do listen and do be comfortable with silence. Silence drives most of us nuts. It's so uncomfortable to sit there and not have anything being said. And so we try and use humor to lighten the mood up or the mood up. We do things because we are uncomfortable, and you have to get okay with your uncomfortableness and just let silence be there. And don't try and change the mood by saying something funny. Let them feel the way they feel. Call and support them. Continually call and support them. Don't just do it once, check the box and say, okay, I never have to call them again. A true friend will call them back several times. And then I think I've covered the last ones here. Offer to help. Can I do an errand for you? I saw your driveway hadn't been shoveled from the snowstorm. Can we come over and shovel your driveway? Can we bring something over? I know people, sometimes I call them and they're like, I still have 9 lasagnas left in the freezer that everybody brought me. I don't need any more food. And what I might do is drop off a $25 gift certificate to Donato's and a bottle of wine and say, use this whenever you want. You're not bringing over pizza or food that's going to fill up more of their freezer space. You're just giving them an easy out sometime down the road. My last few slides here. Some of these are like holiday help, especially as we come up on here on the holidays, and a lot of people get more emotional in December. So some ideas are how to cut your day into segments to give yourself some quiet time for reflection. Don't skip your holiday plans. Continue to do them. Form your new rituals and your new ways of doing things. Have an alternative plan if somebody's struggling too much. Go ahead, decorate, do all the things you used to do. If it doesn't feel right, start a new tradition. That, if dad always cut the Thanksgiving turkey and dad's not here this year, what's the new tradition? Maybe we don't eat turkey. Maybe a grandson learns how to cut the turkey, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be afraid to set a holiday setting. It's me emotional when I think about this, but having a place setting at the table where your loved one maybe once was, and it's just there to remind you that that person was important in your life. And really, really, really important, include everyone in the planning and the participation. Don't say, well, I'm going to prevent the burden from being on everyone and I'm going to take it all on my shoulders. No, your family wants to help. They want to support you. So allow them the chance to participate. Allow especially kids to plan. I remember when my grandma Schoedinger died, I was, 15 years old. And I remember my dad coming to me and my sister and saying, would you like to have grandma's funeral at the Schoedingers downtown or the Schoedingers in Arlington where we all lived? And he assumed that we would all say Arlington because that's where we lived. And all of us in unison said downtown. And my mom and my dad looked at each other and went, why? And we're like, that's where grandpa works. That's where we think of the funeral home as downtown. We never really went to Zollinger Road. And the funeral ended up being downtown because I and my cousins and all the grandkids got to pick. And we all were and it baffled my dad and my uncle.
You probably visited them down
all
there.
the time. Never ever saw him in Upper Arlington, always downtown.
Exactly.
That's where his office was.
Yeah.
I think a lot of these are repetitive here. But here's the slide I mentioned earlier, that there are a lot of grief programs. Many of them are free. There are 29 hospices in Franklin County, give or take. Most of them, if not all of them, have grief therapy programs. You don't have to have been a customer of their hospice to go to them. They do art therapy, they do music therapy, they have support groups and talks. There's even death cafes here in town now. A lot of churches have grief support groups, and funeral homes do as well. Our website at Schoedinger.com lists a lot of our grief support ideas, our grief therapy dogs. We have 2 of them and what they do. So lots of resources in town to help people. Cornerstone of Hope is a great place that serves the whole community with grief support programs, not affiliated with a church or a hospice. Cornerstone of Hope. So lastly, I want to say you need to take care of yourself too. A lot of people become the caregiver and take care of everyone else and forget to take care of themselves. So it's okay to be happy and joyous. It's okay to acknowledge your feelings. And you got to remember, you got to, eat and drink well and get rest and exercise. You can't blow all that off just because you're grieving. So my last slide here is if you want to support somebody and help them, these are 5 dates that maybe you want to put in your calendar. Everybody piles on their grief support the first few days. Everyone sends the email, sends the text, does the call, sends the card. We all do that in that first week. And the person gets all that support and they're in that fog of grief and they probably don't even know what's going on. They don't even remember that you called them or texted them. But then 30 days later, they're still sad. They're still going to bed at night and their partner who laid in bed with them the last 50 years is no longer there with them. They went to church and sat in the same pew and their spouse isn't there with them. They're still grieving. And so that's why calling them 30 days later or 6 months later or 1 year later is still so helpful. If you feel up for it, call them on their birthday. I just did this. A friend of mine who's a pastor in town got a text from me. It was about 2 months after the funeral, but it was on the deceased birthday. And just a short text saying, I'm thinking about you. Hope, we're thinking about Stanley on the date of his birthday, that it's his first birthday, he's not here. That pastor wrote me a response back saying that was one of the nicest things anyone's ever done. And all I did was send him a text on the deceased birthday. Just happened a week ago. Very powerful ways to support people when you kind of surprise them. So that was all of my comments. If there's any questions in the chat room, I can certainly answer them, or feel free to reach out to me after this webinar, and happy to help.
Mike, this has helped me a lot. I hope it helped the others that have tuned in. Your thoughts have been great, and issues that were brought up were great. And I've been around quite a while myself. And one change that I noticed that took place, and I don't know exactly when it took place, but instead of having funerals where you mourn and mourn and mourn, there are celebrations for life now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was one really good change that on the outlook of celebration.
Right. I agree. I mean, it's certainly my favorite funerals are the ones that are celebrations, and we're playing Ohio State music, and we're singing Elvis songs, and we're, having a cocktail and a hot dog rolled up in a pastry puff or whatever. Those are my favorite funerals. And I mean, most people, the baby boomers, are becoming the next funeral consumer. They're taking over more and more of our customers, and that's what they want. And that's what we've had to adapt as a funeral home to give to them.
Well, I think we have one more question, but before getting to that, want to thank you again so much for being here. We'll kind of close up the program formally. We're going to address one more question, and let me kind of look that over. And I think it relates to something you said. You have a couple grief dogs as a part of your Schoedinger service. This individual is asking about just pets in general. Where do they fit in the grieving process?
Sure. If I understand the question right, it might be about pet loss. I can answer it both ways. One, if a pet dies, and two, how do pets support us when we've had a loss?
Right.
We have a very large pet funeral business where we serve families who, it's usually a dog or a cat, but we've had llamas and you name it. And we'll do the individual cremation of those pets. Our website is schoedingerpets.com, so people can go there and see our prices and little memorial items that exist. But pets are a part of our family, and I mean, we see more emotions a person bringing their dog to us than closing the casket on their human loved one. I mean, time after time after time, the emotional response from a pet is significantly more than a human. And I, for a while, couldn't understand why. I was talking to the dean of the Ohio State Veterinary College years ago, and he was great. He's like, our relationship with our pets is one of unconditional love. We think we have that with our family and our spouse, but we don't. But we do with our dog. And that's why it's so hard when they die. And so we do a lot of support things to help people when they lose their dog or their any pet. And if the question was meant for the other, which is how do pets impact us in our grief? I had a perfect example of this the other day. My wife and I were sitting on the couch, and my wife read something on her phone about a friend who had died, and just literally in her own space, she started to cry, but not outwardly crying. Like I hadn't even noticed it yet. And she was now grieving. She had seen something that made her sad. And our dog, we have a little 2-year-old Australian Labradoodle, climbed up on the couch and wrapped his entire body around her neck, like 2 legs were here and 2 legs were here, like a boa around her neck.
Wow.
And he's never done that. And we're like, Luigi, what are you doing? And I looked over at my wife, and I could tell she had been crying. And I said, oh my gosh, Luigi intuitively saw that you were sad and came over to support you, to be near you. That's what is amazing about dogs. And we have 3 grief therapy dogs on our staff that go and do that kind of ministry for the families that we serve. But we all have stories about, dogs laying by the casket, or just they know when something's happened. They grieve too.
Wow. Huh. Well, Mike, again, thanks so much for your thoughts. I know you're going to be back with us next month. We look forward to that. And
Okay.
We appreciate everybody tuning in with us, and we hope you will tune in tomorrow at 2:00.
All right. Goodbye, everybody.
Take care now. Have a good rest of the day.